The rain was so cold that morning it felt less like water and more like tiny needles falling from the sky, but Marcellus Vane kept pedaling because the groceries in the insulated bag behind him were not just someone's order. They were his daughter's lunch money, his overdue rent, and the thin little thread holding his broken life together. By the time he reached the stone house at the end of Waverley Lane, his shoes were soaked, his hands were trembling on the handlebars, and his chest burned from fighting the wind. He expected another closed door, another rushed thank you, another person who would never remember his face. But when the door opened, the woman standing there looked at him as if she had been waiting for him longer than he had been riding through the storm, and with a soft smile that somehow warmed the porch, she said, "Stay here, I'll keep you warm. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet miracles that arrive when life feels impossible, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to A Journey of Hearts." Sometimes one small act of compassion can change the ending of someone's entire story. Marcellus had not always been a delivery rider. 3 years earlier, he had been the head mechanic at a small auto shop, the kind of man neighbors trusted with their keys and fathers recommended to their sons. He had a steady paycheck, a laughing wife named Rosina, and a little girl named Sable who believed her father could fix anything, from broken bicycle chains to thunderstorms. Then Rosina fell ill suddenly, and every hospital bill arrived like another stone dropped onto his chest. After she passed away, the shop changed ownership, his hours were cut, and grief made him slower, quieter, less able to pretend he was fine. By the time the new owner let him go, Marcellus had already sold his truck, pawned his wedding watch, and learned how quickly people disappeared when sadness stayed too long. That rainy morning, Sable was at school wearing a jacket with a missing button and shoes Marcellus had tried to glue back together before sunrise. She had smiled anyway, because children with tired parents learn too early how to be brave. Marcellus had promised her soup for dinner, real soup with carrots and chicken, not just noodles stretched thin with hot water. That promise pushed him through the storm as he accepted one more grocery order on his phone, even though the sky had turned silver and angry over the city. The delivery address belonged to a quiet neighborhood where lawns looked trimmed by patience and windows glowed with warmth. He felt out of place before he even stopped at the gate. The woman at the door was named Ivara Hale. She wore a soft cream sweater, her dark hair pinned loosely back, and though the house behind her looked elegant, there was a loneliness in her eyes that made it feel less like a mansion and more like a beautiful room no one had entered in years. She noticed the way Marcellus tried to hide his shaking hands, the way rainwater ran from his jaw, the way he carefully placed her groceries down so nothing would be damaged even though he himself looked close to collapsing. Most customers saw only the bag. Ivara saw the man carrying it. Marcellus tried to leave quickly, embarrassed by his soaked clothes and the puddle forming beneath his shoes, but Ivara stepped aside and asked him to wait on the covered porch at least until the worst of the rain passed. He refused at first, because pride was sometimes the only coat he owned. Then a sharp gust of wind made him cough so hard he had to grip the railing. Ivara returned with a towel, a hot cup of tea, and a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender. She did not treat him like charity. She treated him like a guest who had arrived in difficult weather. As he sat near the open kitchen door, warming his hands around the cup, Marcellus noticed a small pair of red rain boots beside the hallway closet. They looked unused, dusty around the soles, too small for Ivara. His eyes moved away quickly, but she had seen him notice. For a moment, silence filled the space between them, softer than the rain. Then she explained that they had belonged to her son, Orion, who had loved storms because he thought every puddle was a tiny ocean. He had passed away 2 years ago after a sudden accident on a school trip. Since then, she had kept the house exactly the same, as if changing anything would mean admitting he was never coming back. Marcellus felt his own grief recognize hers. He told her about Rosina, about Sable, about how some mornings he woke up and still reached for his wife before remembering the empty side of the bed. He did not mean to say so much. Maybe it was the rain, maybe the tea, maybe the way Ivara listened without pity. For the first time in years, his pain did not feel like something ugly he had to hide. It felt human. When the rain slowed, Marcellus stood to leave, but his legs wobbled. Ivara insisted on calling a ride, and when he admitted he still had more deliveries to make, she looked at him with a quiet firmness that reminded him of Rosina. She asked how much he needed to earn that day. He hesitated, ashamed, then told her the truth. Rent was due by evening, and if he missed it again, he and Sable could lose their apartment. Ivara did not reach for her purse in a grand dramatic way. Instead, she asked whether he could repair things around the house. The garage door stuck, the garden bench was broken, and the old bicycle in the shed had never been touched since Orion died. She offered honest work, not a handout. That afternoon, under a pale gray sky, Marcellus fixed the garage track, tightened the bench legs, and repaired the bicycle chain while Ivara stood nearby with folded arms, watching memories move through the yard. When the bicycle finally rolled forward smoothly, her face crumpled. She turned away, but Marcellus saw the tears. He did not speak. He simply rested the bicycle against the wall with care, as if it still belonged to a boy who might come running out for it. Over the next few weeks, Marcellus returned whenever he had time. He repaired leaky faucets, cleared the gutters, mended a garden fence, and slowly brought life back into the house. Ivara paid him fairly, always more than he expected, and sometimes packed extra food by mistake for Sable. At first, Marcellus resisted the kindness. But Sable began asking about the lady with the apple muffins, and Ivara began smiling again when the little girl visited after school. The house that had once held only silence started to hold small sounds, Sable's laughter in the garden, Marcellus sanding old wood on the porch, Ivara opening windows she had kept shut for 2 years. Then the landlord's notice arrived. Marcellus had caught up on part of the rent, but late fees had grown like weeds. The building was being sold, and tenants who owed money were being forced out first. He stood in his small kitchen holding the letter while Sable colored at the table, unaware that her father's world was tilting again. That day, he did not go to Ivara's house. He rode through deliveries until his knees burned, pretending effort could outrun disaster. Ivara found out when Sable accidentally mentioned packing boxes. The next morning, she came to the apartment building with her hair damp from a light rain and her expression steady. Marcellus expected sympathy, but what she offered was something larger and harder to accept. She had a vacant carriage house behind her property, once used by her groundskeeper. It needed repairs, but it was safe, warm, and close to Sable's school. Marcellus refused immediately, his voice rough with humiliation. He said he could not live off her kindness. Ivara answered that kindness was not a debt, and needing help did not make a good man less worthy. The argument broke something open in both of them. Marcellus confessed that he was terrified of becoming the kind of father who could not protect his child. Ivara admitted that helping them was the first thing in years that made her feel she still had a reason to wake up. They stood in the apartment hallway with rain tapping against the windows, 2 people carrying different losses, both afraid to reach for life again. In the end, Sable solved what pride could not. She slipped her small hand into Ivara's and asked if the carriage house had room for her books. Ivara laughed through tears and said it had room for all of them. Moving did not magically fix everything, but it changed the direction of their days. Marcellus repaired the carriage house himself, painting the walls a warm shade of blue because Sable said it looked like morning. Ivara helped her with homework in the sunroom. Marcellus found part-time work at a repair garage after Ivara quietly recommended him to a friend, though she never told him until much later. He began to stand straighter. Sable's cheeks grew fuller. Ivara started visiting Orion's grave again, no longer only to cry, but to tell him about the little girl who had planted marigolds by the fence and the man who had fixed his bicycle with hands gentle enough to understand grief. One bright afternoon after weeks of rain, the neighborhood held a small charity market in the park. Ivara had donated baked goods, Marcellus had restored old bicycles for children who could not afford new ones, and Sable ran between tables with ribbons in her hair. The sun had finally broken through, turning the wet grass into glitter. People who once barely noticed Marcellus now shook his hand and praised his work. But the moment that mattered came when an elderly woman brought a rusted tricycle to him and said her grandson had been waiting months for someone to repair it. Marcellus knelt in the grass, opened his toolbox, and felt something inside him settle. He was not just surviving anymore. He was useful. He was seen. Near the end of the market, Sable climbed onto Orion's old bicycle, the one Marcellus had fixed that first day, and rode in slow circles while Ivara watched with both hands pressed to her heart. Marcellus approached her carefully, worried the sight might hurt too much. But Ivara smiled. She said grief was still there, but it no longer stood alone. Love had not replaced what she lost. It had simply made room beside it. Months later, on another rainy day, Marcellus was no longer delivering groceries through the storm. He owned a small repair stall beside the same market, with a hand-painted sign Sable had made. Ivara stood under the awning beside him, holding 2 cups of tea, while rain softened the street around them. A young delivery rider arrived nearby, soaked, shivering, and trying to hide how tired he was. Marcellus saw himself in that boy instantly. Before the rider could leave, Marcellus called him over, offered him tea, and told him to wait until the rain slowed. Ivara watched with shining eyes, because kindness had completed its circle. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to A Journey of Hearts. Your support helps stories of hope, healing, and second chances reach someone who may need them today. Special request: comment kindness can save a life if you believe one warm heart can change a cold day forever. That evening, as the rain faded and sunlight poured through the clouds, Marcellus walked home beside Sable and Ivara. The world smelled clean, like wet earth and new beginnings. Sable skipped between them, holding one hand from each, and for the first time in years, Marcellus did not feel like he was chasing shelter. He felt like he had found it. Not because the storm had ended, but because someone had opened a door in the middle of it and reminded him that even the coldest rain cannot defeat a heart brave enough to stay warm.